Yeah, absolutely. And you guys both kind of bring up and bridge us to our next point of being appropriate. And for those of you that are just joining, we're going to talk about four areas: being alert, being active, and now we're moving in area three, which is being appropriate. And that comes down to everything, a lot of things that you guys just said. But Mario, I want to stick with you because you had started earlier, kind of about this, and like you said, the best way to approach this, right? You have to kind of take yourself out of it, because at the end of the day, when you leave acting crazy, if you do that, your child is, if they go home with you that day, great. Teacher will probably be happy, right? But they're going back the next day or someday soon. So you have to be, I think you got to be cognizant about how you approach, but at the same time, you have to make sure that there is an understanding of your expectations. But Mario, I want to pitch it to you though, to talk a little bit more about that. I guess, I don't know, educator etiquette, or just approaching that situation and just being appropriate under the circumstances.
Well, my mother and all of my aunts were educators. And one of the things that you hear a lot of sitting around educators is the presentation of the parent. And that starts with how you dress. You cannot go to the school in flip-flops. I'm sorry, people. The presentation of that looks horrible, and you are judged. I'm sorry. You're judged. You got rollers in your hair. You got on your bonnet. You know what I mean? You got on cutoffs. As much as you may feel like that's your business, your children are going to be affected by that because your presentation is horrible. It is inappropriate. If you're going to be going to a school to have a formal meeting, you need to be taken seriously. And the first thing is, how appropriately are you dressed? That's just period. I'm sorry. You need to be serious. And I think that you have to present yourself that way because you're trying to represent your child, number one, and you're representing that this is a serious meeting. These are professionals that you're going to speak with. So why not take the time to put on the appropriate clothes and realize that I'm going for a meeting because my child is in trouble? I think the next thing is you need to diffuse your position for a moment, like your attitude or your anger, because remember, you're trying to get results. So you got to breathe. You got to breathe prior to getting there. You got to remember that this is going to be a long process. And so it matters voice tone. It matters your presentation and how you're presenting the facts. And I would simply say, go there with facts. If you need a tablet, you need a notebook, you need to have an agenda so you can have a cohesive conversation. It needs to be cohesive. It needs to be comprehensive. And you need to be able to go and not waste a lot of time with that emotional stuff, but even go in with an expectation. This is what I would like to see happen. This is what I need to know. I want to meet with the following people so we can get this done. Because if it needs to be escalated, you need to be able to have them to say, they did not come in here volatile. They did not come in here. We need to call the sheriff's department or the police department. So that this, if it needs to be escalated, you can start off being respected because your decorum was in order. I think that's important. And that's not to say that you don't have a right to be angry. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, look at the fact that this may be a long process because rarely is it just handled right away. So you may have to escalate something. The last thing I would say is that I think it's important for teachers to recognize the fact also, because there may be some looking, that these parents are afraid. They really are afraid, believe it or not, that they're releasing their children thinking that they're going to be safe, and they hear things. And it takes just a few bad teachers to spoil the whole bunch. And so they are afraid and they're sometimes fearful. I think teachers have to also recognize that there are parents that they have to be skilled enough to diffuse their anger or whatever, because they come in afraid. They come in nervous. When you think about how many kids have been bullied and how many have committed suicide over the bullying, and they also have to recognize, and I don't think it's a shame to say, teachers are limited in what they can do to prevent certain things, because they're administrators. Here's the truth. Their administrators are absolutely most times not supporting them. That's just the truth. And so, you know, your teachers are limited. So when you're getting angry with teachers, please remember they often are being bullied too by administrators. I said it. They're being bullied by administrators. And so you need to be sensitive, recognizing this teacher got 6 other classes with 30 kids in each class. So I understand that they're limited as what they can do. I think it will help.
Yeah, Tabia, what about you?
My point is pretty much just a continuation of everything that Mario has just said. Make sure you have all the facts. Make sure you find out what's really going on. Get more than one perspective. You know, if your child is having a conflict or an issue in one teacher's class, ask some of his other teachers to see, is this across the board or is this just with this particular person? Make sure you have your facts straight, because there's 3 sides to every story. You know, everyone is going to have their side. Your child is going to have their side. The teacher's going to have their side. The other kids in the room are going to have their side of the story. So just making sure that you have gathered all of the information before you approach the situation. My next thing would be, because I do have relationships with educators, you know, by me working in the schools, I built relationships with these people. And I would say for parents, kind of just check yourself to know that these people are really just like you. A lot of times, you know, some people would go into the situation with the idea that, well, you're the teacher, it's your job to do this, it's your job to do that. Like, they're human too. You know, they have emotions too, they have feelings too. They carry a lot on their shoulders, you know. So usually when there is an issue, everyone is on defense. So both parties should actually check themselves, you know, the parents and the teacher, because the teacher is automatically in defense mode, because they're like, hey, this parent is coming at me. I know she's upset. I know there's an issue. You know, now I have to defend my position. I have to defend my stance in the situation. So kind of just taking your personal emotions off the table and understanding both sides. The educator, try to put yourself in the position of the parent. How would you handle it if it was your child? And the parent, put yourself in the position of the educator. You know, if you had 6 classes of 20 plus kids 5 days out of the week, you know, what type of headspace would you be in? You know,
and
when someone is coming and yelling at you.
Absolutely. And an enormous amount of pressure to perform. Right, because, you know, teachers are losing their jobs over test scores. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I wanted us to really talk about that, because, you know, of course, we could do a whole nother panel about how to show up, right? Where, you know, when we're talking about things like attire and attitude and, you know, all of that, we could talk about that all day long. But I think as a practical matter, the things that you guys mentioned is so crucial, I think, to the success of making this year different than the year before, especially if the year before was kind of plagued with problems and communication issues, and now your child is at the same school, may have a different teacher, but the administration is more than likely the same. So if you dealt with them before, trust me, the teachers have already taught. They have already said, oh, you got little Johnny this year. Good luck with his mom. So the seed has already been planted that little Johnny's mom is crazy, right? So what happens is they are, in my opinion, less understanding, right? Because they're like, you know what, let's just go ahead and start documenting now, right? Before we even have to call her. So you really have to think about all of the other things that go into play with this. I know when I was doing employment law very heavily, these are the things that would always come up, right? If an employee would have a claim, and the first thing that they would say, well, you know, when they used to work over in such and such a department, they did the same thing. And I would always say, well, how do you know that? Mm-hmm. Right? And they would say, well, you know, after the reference check, right. You know why? Because they was moving their problem to somebody else, and they were so glad that person was gone. So we see this, the point that I'm trying to make is we see this play out in everyday life. So do not think that it won't play out in the school. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to shift to our last point, which is being assertive. And in my opinion, you have to be assertive. You have to be persistent. You have to ask questions. Assertive and confrontational is not the same thing. Okay? It is just not the same thing. Assertive says, I need you to hear, listen, and respond. That's all. Right? I need you to respect me. Right? But the other thing about being assertive is that you don't have to be argumentative. Like if you do some of the things and practice some of the techniques that Tabia has shared, that Mario has shared about, you have your documentation, you have your information, because trust and believe they are going to have theirs. So you want to be able to have that information. You want to be able to deal with that later down the road. You have to think about, if this was you in your job, what would you be doing? I always tell people, and you can adopt this as well, when you talk to the teacher on the phone, send her an email encapsulating your understanding of the discussion. Okay? Because that way, if you misunderstood something, or if something comes up later, well, this was my understanding. So when you handle things a certain way, right, you have your record. You shouldn't have to do that, right? But here's the thing that I want people to understand. The teacher is not your child's caretaker. And when we get that and we understand this person is a professional that is hired to do a job. They're not a counselor. They're not a caretaker. They're not the child's babysitter. Unfortunately, they're not. Now, the teachers that are lovey-lovey, huggy, all of that, that's great. But at the end of the day, that is not their job. And so you can't really expect for them to be huggy, lovey-lovey. Another thing, and then to be, I'm going to pitch it to you, is that you can't expect anybody to treat your child the way that you do. And so you already put yourself in a bad position when you make that assumption that when you drop them off at school, they're going to be treated just like they're treated at home. Now, for some kids, they may be treated better at school, but we're talking about the ones that don't necessarily think that. But Tabia, I want to pitch it to you real quick, because I know we have to let you go in the next couple of minutes. I want to pitch it to you real quick to sort of talk about, what does that positive assertiveness look like? And what are some strategies that you would tell a parent that they should utilize and employ as they are trying to be active and appropriate while being assertive in dealing with their child's school?
Well, I'll use a quick tip that I kind of use for myself. And, this is across the board. This can apply in many situations. When you're dealing with a difficult matter and there could be potential conflict, or, your emotions are involved and you're angry, think about the desired outcome and what's the best way you can get to that outcome, right? Because there's so much that can get lost in translation when you're upset and when there's so much going on. Instead of focusing on the details of what happened, focus on the outcome of what you need to take place for you to feel safe now that you're, to resolve whatever the issue is. What is it? How does that look to you? What does that look like? Being able to define that too, whether it be administrators or teachers. Well, this is what I would like to see happen. And when you have a focal point in regards to what it is you would desire to take place, you kind of don't really have the mental space to be that angry, because you're operating from a more logical perspective rather than your emotions. So, you kind of have to check those emotions, make sure that at the end of this conversation, the desired effect actually happened. The things that I wanted to be put into place actually came about. And we didn't end the conversation upset. We didn't just say, well, my hands are tied, I'm done with it, I don't want to deal with it. Approach the situation with the desired effect in mind, what it is that you would like to see happen.
That is wonderful advice. And before I pitch it to you, I know we have to let Tabia go. Tabia, let the viewers and listeners know about, let them know the name of your business again, your website, and how they can contact you.
Okay. Again, my name is Tabia Cook. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the Huntsville area. I have a private practice called Inner Healing Counseling, LLC. I do work with adolescents and adults. I have years of experience working as a school-based therapist. You can check out my website to get more information about me and my services at www.innerhealing-counseling.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Tabia, I know you have to go, but I really appreciate all that you've added today. And I also appreciate all the things that you're doing to help our parents and our